Finance Committee. I just really quick want to review how we're taking public comment. It's the same way we've been taking public comment, where you are in a hybrid situation, where we're taking comment one of four ways. You can drop public comment off at the blue drop box at the front of the building. That drop box has been checked and there was no public comment. You can also raise your hand on the Zoom. It's a button that's usually either down across the bottom or across the top, depending on where you have your Zoom instructions. The other option you have is on your phone. When you dialed in, it gave you the code that you would use if you wish to raise your hand that way. Finally, we take public comment at publiccomment@newtowntownship.org. Again, that's public comment at newtowntownship.org. We check that currently. We check that throughout the meeting. When we go back to being in full in-person meetings, we will check it up until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that information will be shared with the township, with the particular committee that's meeting either that evening or the next morning, as the case may be here. And those are the instructions, and I will turn it over to Jim.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Morning.
So, Stephen, thank you for that update. I will use my virtual gavel to call the meeting to order. We will do a, sorry, a second, I have a problem bringing my agenda up. Do a quick
Can you share
roll call. Mr. Nabholz?
Here.
Ms. Pacell?
Here.
Mr. Fisher?
Here.
Mr. Skoukis?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum and full attendance. Awesome. All right, if we can have a minute for a moment of silence. And if you can stand, if possible, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Is there any public comment available, Stephen? For agenda items only?
I see none in the email. I'm looking online and we have no attendees.
Okay.
So there would be no public comment.
Awesome. Okay. Has everybody had a chance to see the agenda?
Yes.
If I may have a motion to consider approving the agenda for this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
By the way, is everybody's microphone on in the building?
Volume. Have a volume control.
I can hear Stephen fine, but all right. Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. If I can have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 19th, 2022 meeting?
So moved. Second.
Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Rich. Is there a Rich there?
Yes.
All right, there you go.
So I would like to point out first and foremost that if everybody notices at the top of the December reports, it's stamped preliminary. It's preliminary because of the method of accounting used in government accounting. We still have the ability to look back expenses into December. So the expenses and some revenues may change in the reports. That's why they're stamped preliminary. And I will give a final December report at the next meeting with the January and February reports, so we can kind of get caught up and more up to date. So starting with the December reports, revenues are ahead $579,000 and expenses are up $696,000 for a net increase of approximately $117,000. Of the expense increase, $215,000 is due to a capital transfer. As we talked about, there's a capital freeze in 2021. There was no such capital freeze in 2022, so we have a bit more transfers of capital. So diving into the revenues, tax revenues are up approximately $158,000. There's still $57,000 left to collect in the general fund taxes in comparison to $94,000 in 2020. So we're actually ahead, give or take about $40,000 where we were. I spoke with Marie, and although there's still $57,000 left to collect at the end of December, some collections came in January, and we actually sent approximately $47,000 to the county to lien. That is right on line with where we usually send. We're usually between the $40,000 and $60,000 that we send to the county for lien. The other major increase in revenues you're going to see is $848,000 in other taxes. There's two major transfers this year: $359,000 transfer of the mainline health building, and $195,000 for the transfer of the AB apartments. In addition, as everybody knows, real estate's up. So each transfer that happened this year, we got a little bit more money. We usually were in between the $70,000 to $80,000 per month for transfer tax. This year, we were hovering about the 90 to 100. So along with the two big transfers, there was a monthly increase as well, just because of the number and the value of houses. On the other side, LST actually saw a decrease of about $14,000. I believe I touched on this at the last meeting. I'm trying to work with Keystone Collections to see what actually is going on, doing some reconciliations between our business license and Keystone Collections to make sure we're capturing all the revenues, but it's a pretty involved project, so it's an ongoing project. License and fines, you're going to see a pretty large decrease of $103,000. This is due to the timing of the cable franchise fees. This is something that we don't receive until actually February, but it gets booked back to 2021. So we haven't received our two cable franchise fees, and they total about $90,000, give or take a quarter. So that would still put us behind about $10,000, but the majority of that actually has been received. It's just not reflected on these reports yet. You're going to see interest. Interest is down $20,000 due to the lower interest rates in 2021 in comparison to 2020. And those are the main revenue variances. So moving on to expenses, as we talked about, our transfer to capital expenses, there's $215,000 more in 2021 than there is 2020. But our major expense here is the debt. As we spoke about from month to month, this was a one-time debt service payment in 2021. In 2022, this is actually moved to our liquid fuels. So this $515,000 expense is actually out of the general fund and into the liquid fuels fund. The other expense I would like to make note of, it just appeared in December, because that's usually when we do the transfer, is it's on the expense by department. You're going to see an interfund transfer of $1.8 million in 2020 and $1.6 million in 2021. This is the transfer that we make from our general fund into our capital fund at the end of the year from the excess of revenue over expenses from the year prior. But those are the main highlights for the December 2021 reports. And like I said, I will get these finalized and report again in December. I'm sorry, at our next meeting in March.
Thank you. Any questions, concerns, Ajita, comments? Okay. Time for new business or? All right, discussion on the 2022 budget.
So at our last meeting, I believe it was Alex. Alex asked for a quick recap of where we're at with our 2022 budget, how we got to where we are, some of the things that are included. So I put a very brief timeline together just to explain to everybody, and then I can go into some detail about some of the things that are included. The budget started pretty early this year, earlier than we've started in past. In May, the Board of Supervisors and the township staff they met, and you could call it almost a brainstorming wish list meeting, if you will, of some things that the board told us as staff that they wanted in the budget, some things that staff was making suggestions to the Board of Supervisors. And we took some notes and put them in our back pocket for the meeting. The next meeting we had was our personnel presentation in July. We presented hiring an additional police officer, as well as a half public works, half administration person. That actually got hired in 2021, not 2022. Steve is sitting right over there. That is our half admin, half public works person. So that got eliminated from the budget, but eliminated from the increase in 2022 was actually 2021 expense. On August 9th, our capital budget was presented to the Board of Supervisors. There was $206,000 in new capital, and then $975,000 in, call it replacement costs. That's replacing things we have, such as the turf field, things along those lines. In September, we presented the operating budget. Overall, there was a $740,000 decrease in expenses from 2021 to the proposed 2022. As we just talked about, the main expense there is the elimination of the $506,000 in that one debt service payment, as well as some decreases in MMO contributions. Just
for those that don't know the term MMO, it's the minimum municipal obligation related to your pension, and it has to do with they determine based on your funding of your pension what you need to put in each year to move your pension towards being fully funded. And because we're fully funded, the amount that we have to put in is less because we're only covering what our current year costs are in that point. And if you ever go below that, then they expect you to put more in to make up the difference if the market's not returning what the expectation is. And I think if you all remember, we actually talked about the pension here a couple times, just that our pension plan's doing well. We are fully funded. We also adjusted the expected rate of return in our pension from 8% down to 6.5%. And so with doing that, we still were able to drop the requirement of what we were putting, the total amount needed to put into the pension plan. So it's a real positive. Yeah, it's one of those acronyms that I throw around. I just assume everybody knows what it means because I know what it means.
In light of the inflation pressures, is there any indication that we're going to see spikes in pension obligations? Is there anything coming along those lines?
It won't be so much tied to the inflation side, other than the non-uniform pension has no adjustment for inflation. So if when a non-uniform employee retires, their pension's set at whatever it is and stays the same for as long as they're retired. For the police, the uniform officers, there is an adjustment up to 30%. And so the plan builds in, the actuarial plan builds in the fact that they know that there'll be an up to a 30% increase over the period of time in which the officer's in. Obviously, if inflation's heavy early on, we potentially have a situation where they move up more quickly, and then there is more of a demand on the piece. The thing that typically impacts our pensions is more of what the stock market return is and how our investment return is. That's the one that has really had more of an impact over the years. That said, if we had multiple years like we had last year with high inflation, that could change that. But right now, that's typically, we've kind of leveled back out and it's worked out okay. So.
To follow up on that question, at a school board meeting last week, I asked the question of how the school board was looking at recent inflation pressures on wages, how they were going to deal down the road with the flattening, I guess, of the revenue base, not increasing due to construction anymore. And I was told that, they can only do things 1 year at a time, and that I'm taking things more from a corporate lawyer perspective and looking too far into the future. And just wondering if, in the township level as well, is it just sort of a 1 year at a time, or are there things that you're looking at down the road that are going to impact the budget substantially?
I don't want to make it sound like the school board's being, we always look ahead. Rich and I look at a 5-year projection of what we think is going to be. And so it's hard to look out much past that. And even in the 5 years, it's easier to track what we anticipate expenses might be versus what we anticipate revenue might be, because there's so many variables to our revenue. If you'd have asked me what would have happened during the pandemic and where we were, I would have anticipated that our revenues would have actually dropped off. Our revenues did not drop off during the pandemic. People
love buying houses.
Yeah, we actually sold more homes in Newtown, but there was actually a greater turnover even of existing homes. Those kind of things, we just didn't, when we went into the pandemic, we actually said, the board and the staff met, and we kind of said, let's slow everything down. That's why we put a freeze on all capital. We just didn't know where we were going to be. And, every month we kept thinking, well, it's eventually going to drop, and it didn't. Looking back, when I talked to my counterparts, one of the big things that we don't have that kind of left us level is we don't have an earned income tax. And because we didn't have an earned income tax, we didn't experience what some of the communities that have earned income tax and are highly dependent upon it. There's some communities they don't have much real estate tax. They do everything through earned income tax. And they experienced some real challenges at the beginning of the pandemic, because that did drop almost across the board when I talked to folks, because there was that huge layoff and there was that period of slowdown, and there was that. And so we try to look at the revenue, what we anticipate. Rich and I have been, anticipating revenues for about 5 years. We look about 5 years out and we watch that, and we're almost always wrong. So there are some things that we're pretty consistent on, and we do well. If you'd asked me last year whether we would have had the same sales in housing that we had in 2020, I would have told you no. It would have had to slow back down, and it stayed up. It's hard to project some of those kind of things, because you're guessing even more. Even the real estate agents said they didn't think that was what was going to happen.
Right.
And so
such is the nature always of forecasting.
Yeah, that's true.
But on the expense side, do we anticipate, predict, forecast, whatever word you want to use, any increase due to the wage pressures? You at a prior meeting said that you were having trouble hiring people at the wage you wanted to pay them.
Yes.
And so the question is that something that's going to, continue?
I think it is. I don't see anything showing that wages are going to return to a prior amount. I think that very rarely is there a push back down on wages. It might level. You may have some years where there's a low impact and low inflation, in the wage rate, but rarely do you see a decline. So, I mean, we are going to have to look at that, and we are going to have to examine that. And more, I think the good news is that what I would tell you is I think we have an excellent team. And because I believe we have an excellent team, the answer will be, instead of looking hopefully at what we have to, what it's going to take to replace some of our folks, is really what does it take to retain? And, you know, that's something that the board and I are going to have start having conversations on, because there is an upward pressure, even in local government, to people can make choices. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, I just came back from a seminar conference, executive leadership development for managers across the state of Pennsylvania. And one of the things that, you know, we were all talking about is there's this high demand for people to work from home. And yet we have, you know, probably 70% of our workforce, we wouldn't know how to do that. You know, how do you have a police officer work from home? That you can't do that. I mean, it doesn't fit. Our public works team has to be here. You know, it's not an option for them to dial in on Friday afternoon and say, or Friday morning and say, I'm going to work from home on Fridays. You know, maybe in the office, we can look at some of that to retain. I talked to a colleague of mine in Chambersburg. He's actually talking about, am I going to allow people to work from home and not even be in my community because he can't find anybody within 20, 25 miles of his community that's willing to even take the job. And so he needs an assistant finance person. And he's talking about, you know, do I let them, can they work remotely? You know, and it is something. So
Ears pick up.
yeah, you're much better off here. So this
Good coffee.
but anyway, my point being is those are the kind of questions that we're going to have to really ask going forward. We're small. It's going to be hard to do that for us. You know, I mean, we've got less than 10 people upstairs. So, you know, that's what we'll be looking at with that group. So, but there will be that demand on pressure, and we'll have to look at that.
I was thinking in terms of on the expense side.
Yep.
And looking out.
Yep.
And not being surprised. Leonard just mentioned the Upper Providence Fire Department going out.
Yep.
I'm wondering whether or not there's a liaison or a discussion going on with the fire department as to where they stand. Do they forecast in terms of what their needs are going to be? Are they going to still be viable and independent 2 years from now, 5 years from now? Are they being pushed towards considering those factors? So
we meet with the fire department on a quarterly basis. Myself and the chair of the board, we have a quarterly meeting that we've been doing ever since I've been here. We have discussed this issue with them. We are very fortunate in Newtown. We still have a reasonable level of volunteerism. What's closing fire departments is not the finances in most cases. What's closing the fire departments are the volunteers. They just don't have the manpower to put on the trucks. And you know, our fire company has made a choice during the day. They have, I think it's about 4 paid employees, and I don't think they're all on at the same time, but like they have 4 different paid employees that they use to man the truck during the day. And that isn't, you know, that is a concern as they go forward, and they're doing it with part-timers. Like they're not people that are coming in as paid full-time staff. They're part-time folks. And there will be a demand on their finances as they go forward. I've had the conversation, some with our board and some, you know, with some others, and said, if and when the fire department goes away, and we believe that's coming, is it 10 years down the road? We're just not real sure. And as long as we have good volunteerism, you know, I think we can make it. I don't see it in the next 5 years unless something changes. You know, right now they're doing okay. They're getting out. They're actually responding not only to calls right here in Newtown, but they're responding to calls in our neighboring communities as what we would think they should be doing. You know, it's part of that reciprocal agreement, and they're able to do so. And sometimes they're still the first on the scene. So we have a really good department. So I want to preface in saying that. But the minute that goes away, and the minute that they have to make the decision to close down, you're looking at taking the police budget and just saying, take that budget and move it over here and call it fire. And that's what it's going to be. And that's about $4 million. And so if you look at what we bring in taxes, I mean, the article that Rich shared with me yesterday, you know, Upper Providence had basically almost doubled its taxes, you know, and what was it, 50 some odd percent or something?
53%.
You know, and that was because the fire department closed down, you know, and it was a direct relationship to that. I can tell you, if we have that happen, we will be looking probably closer to 100% increase.
But the thinking would be that we would not be surprised. They wouldn't drop a bomb on the township.
I would hope that we would not be surprised, because we try to keep that door open of communication, that it wouldn't be something that they come in and tell us the next day, hey, this is where we are. You know,
I realize it's a level of trust.
it is a level of trust. We do ask for their finances, but we don't ask for all their finances. We ask for an accounting of how they spend the money that we give them. There has been an increase to that over the last several years. I anticipate that it will continue to increase. One of the things we did is we purchased the ladder truck, and we did that intentionally. That was a discussion we had with the board, and said, this is something that we should consider doing, that if the fire company goes out of business, the truck is ours. And we're not having to figure out how to go get a fire truck, you know.
Especially now.
You know, then that would be a horrible situation to be in. Not only do we trying to get people to man it, but we're also trying to buy equipment. It took over a year, you know, almost a year to get the fire truck once we ordered it. So it's not something you can just go out and pick up off of your local car lot. You know, it's a very slow process to get that. So the board is being proactive in moving us in that direction, knowing that it's possible. And yet at the same time, our real goal, the win for the community, is when the fire department stays active and stays current and does that. And, you know, and there are times it has financial challenges, and, you know, so I don't want to take away from that. So when they send out their requests for donations, you know, I just encourage people to think about it. If you were having to pay for that in your taxes, you would be paying a whole lot more. And so, you know, I just encourage that.
Well, I was thinking about it, as you would just mention that last point, like I'm familiar with the library.
Yep.
And their cycle, and they do their revenue drive in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
And so the goal always was to not run out of money in the summer. You try and stretch it out as far as you can, and then you get your proceeds to come in the fall, and you can go another year. And I'm wondering whether or not the fire department is in that peak and valley as well, where where they're really stretched before the fundraising comes in.
That's really typical of any non-for-profit. You know, a non-for-profit, typically December is your big month of revenue, unless you have an actual fund drive at another time in the year. I've been involved in multiple non-for-profit boards, and typically if they have a specific fund drive period, then maybe if it's not related to the end of the tax season, you know, when everybody, but typically people typically are writing checks on December 31st, you know, and mailing them out.
I was thinking more, I mean, but they're still in the black. They're not borrowing to cover.
I'd have to have a conversation specifically with them to guarantee that that's not the case. I know they've had times where it's tough. They've got a new firehouse now. They've got a mortgage.
Right. That's what I was thinking about.
You know, that I think that's a different day. And I think this will be the second year where they've been going through that. And so, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if they don't have periods where it gets really tough.
Got it.
I just kind of jump off on some of that. So the other thing I wanted, just so it's not lost in the conversation, is Stephen's right? What's been closing a lot of these fire departments isn't necessarily finances, it's more or less volunteerism. And the one good thing that the Newtown Square Fire Company has been doing is that they have not rested on their laurels. They have always been very active in trying to get new members in the fire department. And our board last year, in particular, passed that resolution to allow for a tax break. If you are a volunteer firefighter, they set up the criteria that you need to meet. It's a certain set number of hours. I believe it's 50. So 40 of those hours is responding to calls. 10 of it's community service, like delivering the wreaths, working the flea market, doing the ride-alongs with Santa, working the flea market, stuff like that. Your township taxes get wiped off completely, as long as you meet that criteria that they have established. They have not seen, candidly, an increase coming from that. And I think it's just because it hasn't been as publicized as it could be, right? So that's number one. Number two, again, this is a situation that's affecting the entire Commonwealth. So I think 20 years ago, there was 300,000 volunteer firefighters, and now we're down to, I think, like 60,000 statewide. So the General Assembly is starting to see this as an issue as well, which is why they gave municipalities the ability to have that tax break. More importantly, they have now opened up the opportunity for vote tech. So students who are in high school can now go in there and start getting their training to be a firefighter. To go through firefighter training, it's 188 hours. So it's a lot when you first sign up. What Newtown Square sees in particular is they get a good amount of young members, and they stay, in the summer months from college, and they can't afford to live here, and they lose it. So there's always a drop off. They have a good amount of young people, and there's a wide gap there between the next age, the next group that's there. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those two things, is that they are working extensively on trying to get members. Yeah, I mean, they're not resting on their laurels is all. And I know that wasn't insinuated in the conversation, but they're doing everything that they can. It just boils down to people. We see it in every organization. People don't want to get involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Understood.
I should note that they do have scheduled on September 17th, their Pints in the Square is coming back, which is a great fundraiser for them. And actually, one other thing with regards to fundraising, they have told me time and time again, and I don't know if this is something that the township needs to kind of highlight even more, but even though it is a volunteer fire company, predominantly a volunteer fire company, when they send out their annual drives, they will get residents who respond back and write nastygrams saying, why should I be doing this when I pay my taxes? So I don't know if it's more or less a conversation that, when we meet with them, whether it's something that the township needs to put out there or if it's something that the firehouse just needs to highlight a little bit more. But there are individuals in this community who think that the fire company is being paid for by their township taxes as opposed to being purely off of the donations.
Maybe that's something we can put on the township website.
Yep.
And when they do their fund drive, put that up on our front page, saying, the fire company is not funded by the town. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
It might not be a bad thing.
It's not just the residents, the businesses do not support the fund drive.
Well, yeah, and Larry, to that point, I don't have the most recent numbers, but when I asked for it back in December, I mean, it is horrifying.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest, and I know as an elected official, I shouldn't say this, but it's horrifying to me as well, the low participation from residents as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, and this is a line that I've said time and time again, is that, when we call 911, it's guaranteed someone's showing up, and they're asking us to show up now. And, it's sad, but that's just the state of affairs that we're in.
To Tina's point, I really think that, if you have something on the website and then we leverage different social channels to point to the website when things like this come up. For example, if we had an enterprising supervisor who, had a decent social media presence, he should possibly link to that when time comes, time to time.
What about
that.
you?
Not everybody like that at all.
But doing that at the right time raises awareness to people. And I like a lot of things, like we talked last year about the budgeting process or the all the money that's coming in from transfer taxes. We need to educate people. The more they're aware of stuff, they may not be aware, for example, that contribution rates are less than 10% of the community, for example. And that, these guys are, they get a contribution from the township, but they're not fully funded. Information like that, citizens need to know that, because I'm not going to say they're ignorant, because that doesn't sound like a kind word, but they're ignorant of the facts. and which Tina, to your point, feeds their foolishness when they make comments.
I think people also have a hard time buying in with, credibility. Like you get a solicitation in the mail, and I think sometimes you question, is this really going where you think it is? Because there are so many scams out there.
You mean like the Police Chiefs Association calling you 3 times a year looking for a donation?
Right, you never know. And there's been so many, reported issues that to your point, I think communication at the right time will help alleviate that concern. And of course, coming from a credible, part of the township would enable people to trust that that's the right thing. So, because, unfortunately, a lot of scams have gone down in connection with volunteer type, firehouses and police, sadly.
Perhaps now's the time to do it, that Upper Providence has closed its fire company.
Yeah.
And we can note somehow, I guess, someone who's social media savvy could point out that what volunteer fire companies mean for budgets
Yes.
for municipalities.
I think it's probably a good thing when we meet with them formally, mutually come up with some verbiage. I think that's probably,
Yeah.
and share it on the website, put it out on social media and blast it out.
Mhm.
And we can probably try to tie it perfectly to when they do their next fund drive.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, so we digress a little bit, but I'm just finishing up the budget and how we ended up where we're at. I believe we left off at the September 13th meeting. Between the September 13th meeting and the October 11th meeting, there was actually 2 public budget meetings held. Every year we hope for the residents to show up and give us their feedback. This year, I believe we had approximately 10 people show up. And then that takes us to the October 11th meeting where revenues were presented to the Board of Supervisors. October 25th was a summary of all the funds being presented. It was the first time the supervisors saw the revenues and expenses together. At the November 8th meeting, it was just another budget recap for the Board of Supervisors. And then on November 22nd, we presented 2 budgets. One was with weekly recycling that showed a deficit of $240,000. And the other one was with our twice monthly current, and that had a deficit of about $80,000. At the end of the day, the board chose to move to the $80,000 twice a month recycling, and it chose to advertise that. And that brought us to the December 20th meeting, where we still had the deficit of about $80,000. The board chose to make a millage adjustment from 1.7089 to 1.7314. And just to put that into context, that is an increase of $2.25 per $100,000 annually. So if you own a $100,000 house, that is only an additional $2.25. But with that $2.25 a year for every $100,000, in the general fund, a police officer was added for approximately $140,000. We added our vehicle replacement program back for approximately $100,000. Increases to the library and fire contribution. We put approximately $37,000 in for tree maintenance and replacement. An additional $38,000 for stormwater. $22,000 for additional mailings and newsletters. We expanded our road program an additional $50,000. We extended our public works replacement program $25,000. And the big expense was, even though we stayed with the twice a month recycling, an additional $191,000 was added back in to the budget. So for an average increase of $11 a year, the residents really did benefit from all these things that we added into the 2022 budget. And I hope that's what you were asking when you said a budget recap.
think it was me that asked for it, but I appreciate
It
it.
was me. Thanks, Rich.
Somebody asked for it.
Thank you, Rich.
See, Jim's screen is black. I don't know what that means.
I see that. With Jim having maybe stepped away for a minute, huh?
Yeah, I can go.
Yep.
Next topic on the agenda is old businesses discussion of the payment in lieu of taxes. Just to recap, this came up in discussion in, I believe it was our November meeting as a result of what was going on in surrounding communities and raised by Alex in terms of, well, who in the township is qualifying as being exempt, their basis of exemption, and are there any payments coming in lieu of taxes by any of these parties? And Rich was able to put together the output report, which shows that we have two owners, entities, I should say, that are paying pilot, and a whole series that are not. I don't know, I didn't count them. It looks like there's probably about 20 on the list here of nonprofit, private schools, religious nonprofits, independent of public utilities or municipal properties. And realizing this is kind of a sensitive topic, we thought it would make sense to put it out and at least explore thoughts as to, is what's going on fair, equitable? Is there something that the township would like to pursue in this regard? Is it something that the supervisors want us to consider, or would the supervisors prefer that we stay away from this boundary? So we have representatives, as I'm punting, as you see the punt, I'm punting to Leonard and Tina in terms of just getting some initial thoughts from the supervisor side of the house as to whether or not are we venturing into territory we shouldn't be, or is there something here that you really want the finance committee to take a stab at?
The question again.
Now, the question is whether or not are we venturing into territory that you prefer that we not venture into, or is it something you really want to discuss and open?
Well, before you do that, I see Jim came back on. Jim was the one that raised this originally.
Oh, okay.
As, Jim, do you have any thoughts on, you had.
Yeah,
a few
and I
meetings ago,
apologize.
You had asked to start this look at the pilot, and what do you think?
Yeah, my microphone wasn't working before, folks. I apologize for that. My vision for this was twofold. One was to identify the folks, the entities, the enterprises in the community that were designated in this way. That's step one. Step two is we need to make a determination to make a recommendation, right? It's the best way to look at this, is what is the best way to handle something like this? If you look at, the biggest issues in communities a lot of times are universities. I'm sure many of you have read what Penn does, for example, okay? Where they negotiated a voluntary payment with the city, and then they do other things to support schools and things like that. Now, Penn's also the largest employer in the area too, so they have a lot more resources. But we need to ask ourselves, we've had a conversation about the fire department, right? Or you have a conversation about police departments, roads, all that different stuff that goes on. And a lot of the entities on this page are big consumers of those services. In fact, arguably in many cases, as big a consumer of those services are as our largest employers, like SAP and places like that. So we need to ask ourselves in a bit of a direct way, one, is this a path we want to go down? 2, if it's one we want to go down, what's the best approach to take? And then 3, finally, is educating the community about these entities and making sure they're aware of what's going on. Sherry, you had a question, comment?
Well, just having been, not just, but about 10, 15 years ago, I guess, Dunwoody tried to get a pilot program working with the township, the county, and school district. And it cost us so much money to do this, and we lost. And so Dunwoody pays a lot of money. And I just wonder if there's a way to ask churches and schools to make a voluntary contribution without going through the hassle of a court case. To me, it was not very easy to get into a pilot with any of the entities. So I don't know if that's ridiculous or not, but I'd rather ask them to voluntarily and point out, that they do use the streets and they call the police and the fire company will show up and all that stuff, rather than embarrassing not-for-profits by putting their names in the paper.
No, that's not the goal at all. The goal is really, if we wanted to go down that path, and that's what you do, you ask. But we need to make determinations as to whether that's a hill we want to climb. There are, if you look at, I'm not looking at assessed values, by the way. I don't care about that Episcopal's land is worth certainly much more than $111 million. That's not my goal. My goal is to make sure that the township is receiving, I don't want to say revenues or money, but that the value that's being received by these different entities is addressed properly economically. Is that a fair way to put it, guys? Because I think there's a lot of these entities on this list that if you had a conversation with them and an appropriate conversation with the right people, reasonable people will have reasonable expectations and conversations about stuff. Anybody disagree with that?
The only pushback I would do to that, though, Jim, is that what's going to happen is that the reasonable conversation is going to end because they're going to get their lawyers involved. Because a lot of these entities, when you look at the tax code, are going to be tax exempt because of just the pure structure of what it is that what they
Sure.
do. I know that there was once a discussion, I don't know if this is what started it or if there was once a discussion from the supervisor's perspective of which entities are tax exempt that draw the services from the township a lot, and are they doing a pilot or are they tax exempt in general? Without knowing the full makeup of the, not to put one on, pull out one over another, but like the Suburban Seahawks Swim Club, I, sitting here, don't see what the legal justification is for that to be a pilot. Again, I could be completely proven wrong if they provide me with the documents, but I don't see how that is a justifiable tax exempt, and theoretically it's not because it's a pilot. But I mean, it's assessed at 1.6 million, and they're giving us, if I'm reading this right, $564 a year.
Correct.
And 25 cents.
Kind of interesting. Some of the other ones.
I would make note, for the ones that you see in that column that just says current pilot amount, that money, and Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually they're actually making the pilot payment to the school district, and the school district is giving us a portion. So they're actually writing a check to the school district as part of this. And so the only difference there is if you see the contribution to the fire department coming from Episcopal Academy, that was part of the land development plan, and that amount comes directly to us. I just wanted to make sure.
So let me ask you this question, Stephen. So the $564.25 from Suburban Seahawks, is essentially our contribution is half of that, or what we receive, is that half of that? Is that what the school district takes half and we take half, or?
No, that's the portion that we're getting from the school
Okay.
district. I do not know what the school district is getting and how I don't know that amount. I just know,
I don't know.
Rich just knows that we get a check usually once a year from the school district for the 564 plus the 2821. And so I just wanted people to understand how we got it, because it's a little different. And I don't know if it was tied to their land development plan. I know the 10,000 that we get from Episcopal for the fire is tied to a land development piece that was requested during the land development process.
So then with.
The one thing to keep in mind, and Leonard, I'm sorry, Leonard, go ahead. I didn't hear you speak. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, please.
So with regards to the utility one, just so I can understand if I'm reading this right, so of the 4 that are on here, 3 of them owned by, I guess it would be Aqua or Essential, and then the other one being Pico. Are you saying that we received $7,000 total, or are we receiving $7,000 for each?
I don't think we're,
$7,000 total.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I just don't want to see this. I think there needs to be a discussion on the ones that we think are legitimate. If they have a pilot already, and I'm just, disagree with me if I have this wrong or if you disagree, but I would think that we would want to go after the ones that have pilots to see if they would increase that contribution. Ones that we don't think are legitimate tax exempt entities, to have a conversation with the township solicitor. I just don't want to see the finance committee go down a road and then it open up a can of worms of litigation with tax attorneys. Because like, for instance, like the Catholic Church, I mean, we're not going to win that one, or even any of those churches. Because they're going to be able to make that argument of why they are tax exempt, and I guarantee you they're probably going to tell us to pound sand for a pilot. But I guess we never know if we don't ask.
But Leonard, I think that originally what Jim had, and Jim can correct me, but that he had said, let's look at this list and can we just approach these people and say, hey, forget the word pilot, I guess, as an official term, but say, hey, you're using the township resources. People are using the roads to get to your church, etc. Can you chip in a little bit now, and help the township out, and approaching all those folks that way, not in a way that suddenly gets everybody's lawyers involved, or it really is in any kind of official program. Look at it as a donation to the
The
township.
problem, but when you open that, even for the slightest crack, they're going to say, wait a minute, if we do this for Newtown, are we going to have 30 other municipalities tapping on our door for their little piece? So you're almost setting a precedent. But by not calling it a pilot, you say, okay, well, that takes it out of this legal structure. But if we're voluntarily paying money to a municipal township that we happen to reside in, why wouldn't we be doing that in other municipalities that we own property, Catholic Church?
Oh.
So you kind of, there's no secrets. So if St. Annie's is paying Newtown money, any other municipality with a Catholic Church is going to say, what about us? So you gotta figure it.
Well, that's not our problem.
No, I understand, but for them to even acknowledge the equity argument that we would make to them would open the door for them to be approached similarly by the other municipalities. If we're going to go down this road, we have to figure out how to get over that.
Yeah. By the way, I agree with that perspective, and that's why we need to put together a game plan. But the one thing we need to keep in mind is 2 elements of this. And Leonard, just go back to your initial point. I know someone mentioned it a few moments ago. The purpose behind this, when what behind it was, I was literally driving past a swim club one day, and I said to myself, those guys are a nonprofit entity. And I knew that because my kids used it 100 years ago. And I'm saying to myself, then I drove past a big church that sits on the corner of Gradyville and 252, and I said the same thing. And then I was reading stuff about what was going on in Philadelphia. And then suddenly the county started going after some of these, what they purported to be sham operations that were really not nonprofits. So that's when I sat back and said, we need to look into this and determine what's going on in our little backyard. My vision of this is pretty straightforward, is that we've identified the entities. We determine what the best approach would be and make recommendations to the supervisors. And then finally, really all we're looking for is a sense of fairness, and looking for what people are receiving, what the value these folks are receiving, and whether they're willing to make a contribution to the community in which they are. Sherry, I saw your point. We need to find that out. We need to determine whether there are indeed payments being directly to the fire company that don't go through us.
Yeah,
But,
just-
but
If I can interrupt just one quick
Yeah,
second.
please.
Excuse me. If we're going to make comment, please do it verbally and not in the chat. We do not record any comments in the chat. So in order for it to be part of the public process, we need to make sure we go ahead and just unmute and speak, and we'll deal with it, please.
Sorry, I thought you didn't want us to disturb the meeting. I just thought you didn't want us to disturb the meeting. That's why I've been writing it in that area. So, Okay,
Let me,
thank
going back to the utilities, who sets the, is that an agreement that we, like, who sets that per to tax?
That's
amount?
through the state.
To the
We
state?
have zero control over that.
Has that increased at all?
It's been that number for years.
Yeah, it fluctuates. That's why I said approximately. It fluctuates $50 here, $100 there each year, but
So
it's
even
right
as
around.
Even as the share prices go up, the amount still stays the same?
Our share stays the same.
Got
Because of what I'm about to say, it will probably require a little bit of direction from the board, and I don't anticipate that we can't accept just the two that are sitting here today, but we need a more full board action. But I do think there's some legal ramifications how we move forward, and it would be my recommendation, now that we have this list, is that we go back to our solicitor and ask our solicitor to review what are the options that are available, because even just going out and asking for money, there's some ramifications for the township doing that. I mean, the second class township code is very specific about how we can get revenues. And there are very specific guidelines through the process. And there's a reason for that. We have the authority to tax. And so I come and we place a tax upon you. And then if I go back and then I'm starting to arm wrestle you for donations, and now you could argue that I'm actually adding a second tax upon you. And so I just want to make sure that as we go forward, and if the board would agree to this, my thought is, now that we know our list, we know where we are, let's examine each type and say, what are the options that we have? Get some legal information back to you as the finance committee, so that you can then know legally what we can do, and then make a recommendation to our board about how to move forward. If our board would be willing to allow the solicitor to spend some time on that, but that would be my recommendation.
Can I just add something to that? So again, I don't, from a supervisor's perspective, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a good idea, but the finance committee will have to make the decision. The only thing I would ask is, based off of the information that was provided to us, can you also add another column to when they got their tax exempt status? Because I'm just curious if some of these are ones that, are not, and I'm not saying anyone here is doing something nefarious, but there is litigation that we have seen in other situations related to tax exempt status, where they're not necessarily legally tax exempt anymore, but they're still receiving that status because they're filling out forms that might not be a perfect example, not necessarily filling out forms. The cemetery, St. Peter and Paul, owned by the Archdiocese, went to a for-profit company. All the school districts started jumping on it. The different school districts for the different cemeteries. So has anything else changed in this ownership where it's no longer non-for-profit and it is a for-profit? I just think that would kind of help, because drive the conversation with the solicitor.
Yeah, I could absolutely work on that. I'm not sure if they need to recertify. I know the veterans exemptions that you see at the bottom, they need to recertify. I believe it's once every 5 years. And I did check on the 3 actives that we have, and they are up to date and certified. So I don't see why I can't do that for the rest of them.
Rich, can you explain what the veteran exemption is?
My understanding of it, yes, I can. I believe that if a veteran is permanently disabled in the state of Pennsylvania and they make under a certain amount of money, they are exempt from taxes.
They have different ratings.
All right, so how do you folks want to take the next steps here?
One second, Jim.
If a veteran is been classified as 100% disabled They have to check that box, and they have to also check a box about their income, and then they're given a property tax exemption.
Thanks, Alex. I think it's important that we, I would have not have known that, so it's good to know. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to bring this to a little bit of a closure and what next steps we want to take.
I think that it would be appropriate for this group to request from the board that the solicitor look into what the options are related to pilots. And just to, I think you could keep it that general. By the nods that I'm seeing, my guess is we would get the support to do that. And then that way we can engage the solicitor into doing just an overall review so that you would have, a little bit clearer direction of what we could do and what we can't do. Because it may, and I'm going to use it broadly and say, let's not just call it a pilot, but what are the options that the township has in approaching non-for-profits for potential funds, and just leave it at that.
No, that makes sense.
Motion, that's what I would recommend.
Do we need to make a motion on it, Stephen, or just?
I think that a motion that I could then take it back to the board and put it on their agenda as a request from the finance committee because it is engaging our solicitor. There will probably be some cost, and I just want to make sure that the board has approved that.
Okay.
Stephen, do you think we could have them also put in there, as you said, maybe township services?
Yes.
So that the solicitor could look to see if there's a way to, if it can't be taxes, but maybe help the fire company. Because a lot of these non-for-profits have buildings and have property that would, potentially be an issue for the fire company. So I'm just making a suggestion, but it's up to this committee how they want to word it.
No, that makes sense. Okay. So would somebody mind packaging that up in a motion and we'll move it across? Anybody have? Actually, I'll start it. So I'd like to make a motion that we request the Board of Supervisors to request the township solicitor to investigate potential areas that we may take as a township in regards to entities, organizations, enterprises that have operations in a township and do not pay taxes due to their status. Yeah, so that's my motion.
A second.
Any comment? All right, so the motion passes. Thanks for discussing that, guys. Last thing is the capital improvement. By the way, I'm cognizant of the time. It's 5 after 9 if anybody has a hard stop.
10 seconds on the capital improvement. We did have an interim meeting in the beginning of February. We are waiting for more financial information to be derived from the township engineer. There's a lot of detailed information that's been assembled at this point. And once financial information is overlaid, we can then have a basis to, as a working group, to come back to this finance committee and present what our findings and initial thoughts are regarding costs and means by which revenues could be secured to fund these projects. And so we anticipate, based on the timeline at this point, that the supervisors will have received the financial data in question at the end of this month, the second meeting this month, which will allow us then to meet as a subgroup, analyze that, and come back with a recommendation here to this group. That's my status.
Okay. Anyone else on that? Okay. Any items for the next agenda? remembering that we have probably, what, about 2 weeks or so after this meeting, Stephen, to provide you with additional agenda items?
That's correct.
Anyone have any other pet projects, ideas? Things that we'd like to see Rich do that would give us enjoyment watching him respond to it?
I was thinking the same thing.
Torture.
If I can make a recommendation, be easy on Rich. It's the middle of the audit. We're trying to get the
Close.
budget book done to go
Close,
for the
yeah.
budget award. I'd like to keep Rich around, so.
Yeah, Harrisburg's looking good. Chambersburg,
Yeah.
looking good.
All right, fine. We'll wait till April for that stuff then. It's a fair way to look at it.
Appreciate it.
Fair
No
game.
problem. All right. Any public comment available out there, Stephen?
I just checked again. There's nothing in the email box, and we don't have anybody in attendance, so I think we're good.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thanks for your time, everybody. Anything else before we close up? All right, guys. John, I'll see you at breakfast.